But so we see there's that, as she offers this costly sacrifice, this show of her worship, love, appreciation. She's acknowledging him as the king. And as it were, she also is preparing him for burial. As this wonderful act of faith and worship is taking place, we see that there is criticism, indignant criticism from the other disciples as this happens. Verse 4 says, "There were some who said to themselves indignantly, 'Why was this ointment wasted like that? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor.'" So they said that amongst themselves. But they didn't just keep their opinion to themselves. Because the rest of the verse 4 says, "And they scolded her." So you almost wish they kept their opinion to themselves. Shameful enough that they would think it. But that fact that they would criticize her as she's worshiping Jesus. You know, as I was just thinking through this, I was just thinking, what a shame. What a shame. That the disciples, those that are chosen to be the leaders, those that heard so much of Christ's teaching, who knew him so well, when they would see this beautiful act of worship, that they would criticize. I was like, I wish there was another word for just shame. So I looked it up in my thesaurus. This is a disgrace. It's ignominy. It's scandalous. It's scandalous that those who should have known Jesus best criticize someone for giving this act of worship to him. He affirms her. As the disciples criticized, Jesus affirms. And the affirmation's given in verse 5. Rather 6. "And Jesus said, 'Leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She's done a beautiful thing to me. For you always will have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do good for them. But you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. And truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her.'" Jesus says this is not something that ought to be criticized. He says this is beautiful. He affirms it. He says this is great. And then in response to the suggestion that this should have been given to the poor instead, Jesus says, well, you will always have the poor among you. And in fact, that's a quote from Deuteronomy 15, which we briefly looked at last Wednesday night as we studied through the book of Deuteronomy. And in Deuteronomy 15 and in the teaching of Jesus, it says, it is a good thing, a great thing, a wonderful thing to help the poor. But Jesus says here, it's good to do that. And you always can do it. But he says right now, it's appropriate to honor me instead. Who does Jesus think he is? The cheek. He says it's better that it goes on me than that it goes to help the poor. Audacity, isn't it? Didn't Jesus just teach on Tuesday in Mark 12:31? He's asked, what are the greatest commandments? And he says, you know, the second greatest commandment is that you love your neighbor as yourself. That you be generous. That you care for other people. And now he says, it's better that it goes to me than to them. Who does he think he is? He's ignoring the second commandment. Or he's acknowledging the first commandment. Because the first commandment was that you should love the Lord your God with your heart and your soul and your mind and your strength. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus seems to be implying that he's not just a neighbor. And he's not just a man like everyone else, but that he is God himself. And that he's saying that this act of worship to me as to God is a wonderful and a beautiful thing. We do not need to, for us today, look at it as such a hard division or separation for us now between loving God or loving people or worshiping Jesus or helping the poor. For us, it's not a matter of either or. But at that time, for that night, Jesus says the best thing is for me to be worshipped right now, for me to be anointed as king, and for me to be anointed for my burial.